Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our Freshwater Stewardship Community webinar. We're excited to have Rosmarie Lohnes from Helping Nature Heal Inc. back with us. She gave an amazing presentation at the beginning of 2022, and we're so thankful to have her and her team back today. My name is Monica Seidel. I'm the Communications and Fundraising Manager at Watersheds Canada, and I'll be the host for today's webinar. We also have Nicole Dubé, who is our freshwater health coordinator, who is hiding behind the scenes. She's going to be helping with any tech problems that you have, as well as curating any questions you have in the chat. So as Rosmarie is presenting today, feel free to drop your questions throughout the presentation. We're going to be going for 2 hours today instead of our usual 1 hour. And if you have to leave the session at any time, or if your internet drops or anything like that, we are recording and sending today's presentation only to people who have registered. So you will get a recording of today's presentation early next week. For those of you who may not be familiar with Watersheds Canada, we're a national charity that's headquartered in Eastern Ontario over by Ottawa. We are focused on delivering freshwater stewardship programs that help communities take action to protect their lakes, rivers, and shorelines. And we do that through a number of habitat restoration programs, like our Natural Edge Shoreline Restoration Program that you can see in the top right, and our fish habitat restoration program, which you can see in the bottom left, where we're putting a bundle of woody debris back into a lake, which is valuable fish habitat. We also have a number of outreach and education programs, like our Love Your Lake Shoreline Assessment Program that is delivered in collaboration with the Canadian Wildlife Federation. And that's the photo in the bottom right. And then one of our newer programs is our Nature Discovery Program, which is working with public libraries, schools, and community groups to help get families out in nature and connecting with local animals and plants, and giving them different action steps and restoration programs they can take part in to help their local nature. So if you're interested in learning about any of those programs or the ones that I didn't mention, you can learn about them at watersheds.ca/our-work. One thing I'd like to draw everyone's attention to is our symbolic adoption program. So we have a number of artwork illustrations of different species that our restoration programs benefit. And so this artwork is printed on a 5x7 postcard, and it is all done by different Canadian artists. It makes for a really lovely gift. And you can frame these or just have them up on the fridge, and always know that the donation you made is helping protect these different species. So if you are interested in looking through any of those adoptions, they are all eligible for a Canadian tax receipt, and you can check them out at watersheds.ca/gifts. Next Tuesday is Giving Tuesday. For any of you that are not aware, this is a global generosity movement where people are encouraged to give back to their community. So you can obviously do this in a number of ways, such as volunteering or donating. Watersheds Canada has been very fortunate this year to again partner with Maitland Tower, who is matching all new monthly donations for Giving Tuesday. So if you are in a position to give back and support the different freshwater stewardship programs that I just mentioned, your donation is greatly appreciated, and it will be doubled thanks to the generosity of Maitland Tower. So you can take the Maitland match by going to watersheds.ca/donate. Finally, I just want to explain a bit about what the Freshwater Stewardship Community is, and that's the program that we are all online for today. It's an online community that is free, and it is Canada-wide. It's been running for 3 years now. And there is a wide variety of topics that have been archived on our website. We have 40 webinars and 35 accompanying handouts that go with each of those webinars. There are also activity sheets and books for families to use that engage on the different topics from those webinars. And all of that is available at the link where you would have registered for today's webinar. So if you just scroll down to the bottom of that page, there are 6 different menu buttons, and you can pick different topics to learn about and then see all of those past recorded webinars. And I would like to thank the 3 different foundations that make our freshwater stewardship community possible, which are the Echo Foundation, the SM Blair Family Foundation, and the Peterborough KM Hunter Charitable Foundation. Something that I mentioned comes with every webinar is the education handout. So this is a summary of the presentation and also has a number of additional steps that you can take based on that topic. So different community science programs you can participate in, or restoration programs, different resources that you can read and share with your community. And so there will be a handout created for this presentation, and it will be sent out in the follow-up email along with the recording. To finish off 2023, we are in the middle of our climate change mini-series for the freshwater stewardship community. So we have 2 more after today's webinar. The next one is taking place on Tuesday, November 28th with Chantel from our Watersheds Canada team. And then we also have one happening on Wednesday, December 6th with Liz Favett, who will be talking about paleolimnology and how this can help us understand what's happening in our lakes, and especially with algal blooms. So if you are interested in attending either of those, I would encourage you to go to watersheds.ca/freshwater-stewardship to register. And both of those sessions will be recorded as well. So if you're not able to attend live, I still encourage you to register so that you get all of the resources after the event straight to your inbox. So now I will introduce our keynote presenter for today's webinar. Rosmarie Lohnes is one of North America's leading experts in protecting priceless coastal properties from erosion. She is the founder, president, and CEO of Helping Nature Heal, Inc., which is an award-winning landscape design company that has been recognized globally for its work in mitigating shoreline erosion and preserving coastal ecosystems. Rosmarie pioneered the Shoreline Erosion Management system, which has helped dozens of homeowners protect their properties from coastal erosion. Rosmarie's work has been featured in dozens of media outlets across North America. Rosmarie has a BA in Conservation and Environmental Studies from York University, with prior studies in architectural design and further training in horticulture as therapy, ecological landscape design, shoreline erosion, master gardener, and landscape management. Thank you so much, Rosmarie, for joining, and you're welcome to share your screen now.
All right, there we go. Found the unmute button. Wonderful. So Dawn is in our background and she's going to share screen with our presentation. So I'll just give that a second as Dawn comes along. Thanks so much, Monica, for inviting me again to speak in this faculty. I hadn't realized it was the beginning of 2022, so it's more than a year since we've seen each other. And look forward to connecting with all of your great folks through this presentation. So while we're waiting for Dawn to pop up that slide presentation, I wanted to just mention quickly that we will be having a giveaway today as well. If people send us questions, comments, queries, in, let's see, I'm supposed to be holding something here. Hang on a second. There we go. Now I can see it. Yeah, so if you send us, and the email address will be at the end. If you send us some questions or comments about the presentation today or have any queries at all, we're going to send you out our monitoring guide, which will be discussed more fully under the protocol in our presentation today. So I'm so glad to be talking to you about coastal resilience. This is, we are, of course, in the Maritimes here. I'm not sure if everyone on the presentation knows that, but we are found here in Bridgewater, Nova Scotia, and we primarily work in the Maritimes in ocean coast environments. However, we do also put the same tools and technologies together on freshwater lakes, on our inland lakes here. There's plenty around in our space, as well as river systems too. So these strategies are effective anywhere land and water are connected, whether it's salty water or fresh water, doesn't matter. Of course, there would be different plant recipes perhaps in those different zones, but the methodologies and techniques that we're going to talk about today are similar in both of these salt and freshwater systems. So this is a lovely coastline that you're looking at here. And I just wanted to preface our presentation with that. Okay, so we'll hit the first slide, please, Dawn. Excellent. So you'll note on the left-hand side, I was just the keynote speaker at an Eco Canada event that happened last week. And in Halifax here, they're on tour going across Canada, presenting their organization. And it was quite a pleasure to speak with them as well. You'll find us in various magazines and articles and newspapers and such. And of course, you can check us out anytime on our website and have a gander at the various awards and things that we've won over the years.
Rosmarie.
Okay. Yes.
I'm not seeing the slides.
You're not seeing the slides. Okay. Let's check in here. Dawn, do you have any input on that?
I'm not sure. Are you able to see them, Rosmarie?
I can see them, yep, but
maybe
not being able to see our slides yet.
Can Nicole see them?
So both Nicole and I only
just-
see my slides.
Okay, interesting.
Okay.
Maybe, do you need to share?
It says I'm sharing, but let me just stop and try to reshare perhaps.
Yeah.
Okay, let me see. Okay, I think this should maybe fix it. So I'm just going to change it from multiple share to one person. And that should fix the problem. Sorry about that, everyone. I can just go back to the starting and then everyone else can see that also.
Yes, it's coming through now.
Great. Perfect.
Great.
Thanks for letting me know.
Yes, thanks for catching that quickly. I'm not very technological, so Dawn is the magic person in my world. So thanks for making that work, Dawn. Great. So yeah, just a beautiful picture of our coastline here, quickly eroding. And yeah, we'll flick to the next slide then, Dawn, please. Okay. And yes, this is where sort of you can find us regularly. Most media outlets are interested in our work and definitely show up in newspaper articles and interviews and things. So a quick Google search can bring those old archives back up to you. But if you're looking for anything in particular, please do let us know. And again, it's just wonderful to be awarded some of these innovation awards and things. Coastal Zone Canada, of course, was back in 2014 and really impactful on our world here, working in the coastal communities, of course, around the Maritimes. But as I was mentioning earlier, the monitoring and the assessment protocols are the same, whether you're in salty or freshwater. Okay, we'll do the next one. So as mentioned, we've been working in the Maritimes primarily, and as you can see in some of this data, 13,000 kilometers around Nova Scotia. That's a lot of space for me to work on. So I'm often encouraging other landscape companies, other service providers to get on the bandwagon around repairing riparian zones and coastal zones, because there's just really too much work for myself and my team when we add up the three main maritime provinces. Of course, we're moving into Quebec this year, and then we have our sites on Newfoundland as well. So there's lots of potential. The erosion is not stopping, and the coastal resiliency really needs humans to get in there and plant more and get the plant-based strategies moving. Luckily, our federal government and provincial governments, for the most part, have recognized that the plant-based systems are a real gem and something that they're interested in investing in. So we can get some financial support through grants and funding options when we do our workshops and educational facility. Okay, we'll hit the next one. Our methods are based on science, which is really amazing because this really creates a niche between traditional landscaping and ecological restoration and landscaping as well. And so Dawn is our research manager, often has interns working alongside her. Dawn also flies our drone. So she does things like the contour mapping, bathymetry, fetch. We are often referring to the IPCC in their documents as they are released for data, but also for any forecasting and modeling that they might be assisting us with. And so it's really important that we keep our finger on the pulse of the scientific research that's happening on a daily basis. We do a lot of work with mycelium, and it's really a valuable entity for us to be able to inoculate these coastal properties. And we'll talk more about that in our when we get deeper into the presentation about how resiliency can be grown literally through the plant-based strategies and how we can partner plants together to make them even more effective on the shoreline. Yeah. So we can hit the next slide. So a major part of our work is plants, and we want people to be really focused on native and indigenous species, as well as species at risk. It's really important that we look at these riparian zones as a real, really abundant place that has the capacity of harboring not just one group of species, but two, where they have the wet species coming up into the land, like turtles and snakes and other amphibians, where they need some time on the shore to lay their babies, have their babies, rear their young, teach them about flying, teach them about collecting food, and really all those survival skills. And we have so many species at risk in the various communities that it's a really good opportunity for us to design these plants right back into the projects. And so really thinking about who's there now as far as flora and fauna, but who's missing and why are they missing, and can we do anything to contribute to their success? So it's a really great opportunity, I think, for us to think a little broadly about who should be there, and if we can reclaim or replant the habitat plants that are necessary for those birds or other species, then we should really take that opportunity and jump in on that. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we'll hit the next slide. So the important thing about our riparian systems, of course, is to keep planting them. Planting once isn't enough. We have to keep on moving, especially if we're taking a location that perhaps was mowed in the past, like you see in this slide here in this situation. We did a primary planting this spring. Now we'll go back for 2 more plantings next year. The protect part is the seaweed and brush that you see around those plants right now. We really need to understand that if they're coming out of a nursery system, even if the nursery is outdoors, like our native plant nursery, they still need time to acclimatize to their new environment. So adding a thick layer of mulch, and in this case, we use seaweed that we are right on the coast, but twigs and branches and those decomposable commodities that the plants would normally have in their ecosystem. Since it was a mowed space before, of course, there's no leaf litter, there's no detritus hanging around. So we have to facilitate that. We have to provide it for the meantime until those plants get big enough and start to provide their own leaf litter, their own decomposables. In that way, we are still sort of inoculating and kickstarting the soil food web and how they work and what they need to live and survive, so that they're really active in the soil horizons where these new root systems are laying. We want, of course, to always remember about the poop loop, and that's how our plants will feed primarily from the soil ecosystem, from the soil food web critters, all that microbiology stretching up, coming up, eating up all this detritus that's on the ground, and then pulling it back down into the soil systems where they poop out the minerals and nutrients in the plant available form, which is really important. You'll see that we have and feed, because we do have to support these plants for a first while. They need to be nurtured and cared for at least the first 2 years, sometimes 3, depending on how aggressive the environmental component is in your area. And we, of course, create our own fertilizer called Abundance. It's mycorrhizal fungi mixed with liquid seaweed from our local area here in Nova Scotia. So we have a partner who has the permits to collect that seaweed, and then they liquefy that for us, and then we're adding the mycorrhizal fungi. So if anyone's interested in that as well, I can send you some more information and even some sample jars if you like. So plant, protect, and feed. And I would say that's on repeat for at least 3 seasons to really build those root to soil and root to root connections that are really beneficial when we think about resilience in the riparian zone. Okay, Don, we'll switch slides, please. So one of the main things that we do is increase the riparian buffer zone, which means that we want to stop mowing directly to the edge, which happens a lot. People, especially when you're on a beautiful lakefront or oceanfront property, you want that massive view. A lot of times that's the sole reason why people are buying these properties. But that does cause some challenge to our lifestyle there, because it increases the rate of erosion when we have significant overland flow. So what we want to do is really, as a first step, encourage people to increase that riparian zone by planting, creating no-mow zones. You can see here we have a string line put up with fencing and signage that says, this is habitat, please do not disturb. And those hay bales are there as like big physical barriers, but also snakes and salamanders love living in hay. So we've got them there to increase the habitat quotient for those critters that might be there. You'll see as well that we have, stumps of wood and leaning wood and a little bit of a brush wall back in there as well. All of this is meant to sort of mimic a natural edge that might have coarse woody debris and leaf litter and various types of biomass within the ecosystem there, as well as the plants, of course, and you can see seaweed mounds around each of those planted plants. It's just really important that we bring nature back. And I realize completely that people want these views and want access to the water, and there's no problem with having a footpath through that. Could be mowed if you really wanted to, could be wood chipped. That's not a problem at all. We want people interacting with these spaces so that they learn to love them and then become stewards of them. So having that human interaction is really important. But it's also important that we give time to the space to sort of heal up on its own. We know that the compaction just through mowing alone is so detrimental to the soil food web, but also the rate of infiltration, that rainwater and the lake splash up and wave splash up. So we really want to be able to set aside some space. Now, people will ask, well, how much space should we have in this riparian zone? Depends where you live. There could be bylaws that state you need a 20-meter buffer all the way up to 300 feet. In one case, we have a client on Prince Edward Island that, as you may know, is eroding quite quickly. And that client actually has a 300-foot buffer attached to their deed. So we just know that with that huge of a buffer, it's eroding so fast that we really need to keep human compaction and interaction at a minimum there, while keeping access to the water. So they have a beautiful path that kind of S-curves down to the water, and all of these wonderful plants and infrastructures mixed in with them so that we can give the benefits to the non-human critters and plants, and then also keep those special places special and access to the water for our humans. So in one way or another, we have to learn to kind of cooperate and work in these very abundant but fragile zones so that we're not causing ourselves damage further down the road. One of my colleagues says that we have to love a space before we can become a good steward of it. And so really having people within these spaces in a sort of a purposeful manner by doing good work in those spaces really helps to bring the stewardship along. Yeah, that's really important. Okay, Dawn, thank you for that. We'll go to the next slide. So this is a accumulation of information here of what we were just talking about keeping those riparian zones healthy. So you can see that infiltration rates are quite high, the slope runoff is quite low, and we have some evapotranspiration, but also we have the bounce off factor of the canopy of those plants. So in this pictogram, it shows, larger trees and shrubs and perennials. There's a bit of a mowed path in through that and a perennial meadow. Really important that we give way for humans to access and steward these spaces, feed them, water them, plant them. But we want to just be really careful with how close we get to the edge. So if we have this, bigger plant community in there, of course, we want to be able to prune or trim for view planes and things, but the value environmentally is so large to having these plants here. The bounce off in particular is really important so that those heavy rains that we've been getting lately don't just sort of drill a hole down through the soil horizon. You'll also notice in this schematic that we've added the root systems, and that's something that's really important to us because we are really talking about the root systems binding to each other and binding to the soil, sort of knitting that soil horizon together, and thereby increasing that resilience to wave and wind erosion. So if we have a healthy canopy and really strong root systems, and a wave comes in and hits on top of our plants, we have this bounce off of the canopy. We have some water finding its way down through the gaps in the canopy, down the trunks, of course, and then following that pathway down into the soil through the root systems. So really important that we do something really positive with this water rather than that energy merely taking land away from us and eroding our riverbanks and lakefronts and such. So having these plants in very unique combinations is helpful. We call those plant recipes, where we're actually partnering the companions of the plants that exist in the location already with those that are benefactors in the companionship role. And so this soil horizon becomes very healthy and very resilient to change when we have the above ground and the below ground ecosystems healthy and diverse. Mm-hmm. Can talk more about that too in the question and answer if people have more specific questions about plant types and plant recipes. Okay, Dawn, we can flip this one. So here's this picture is of a living shoreline that is about, I would say this photo is probably at the 5-year term when we took this photo. So this is quite a steep slope on the Northumberland Strait. It has this sort of shallow slope grade to it from the top till about mid slope, and then it goes pretty much straight down. We've been able to rehabilitate it and plant it up quite effectively, and still stands to this day. This was a quite early on project for us back in the early 2000s. And it's matured really well, and so is really quite self-sufficient now, and rarely do we have to do any work on this slope. So I just implore you to really think about these slopes as, you know, they're landscapes as well. They may just be on a slope. It could be the riverbank, the lakefront, or here on like this photo on the shorefront. In any way, they are living through the same sort of dynamic processes, right? The wind and wave energy is consistently coming into play. We have pressure from the upland with mowed areas and development, whether it's in your neighborhood or, you know, next door. And then we have gravity and slope movement, a natural process of slopes moving down. So we really have to be looking at it from, I sort of think of it as a 5-dimensional question to the answer here. In that we have to be looking at it from all these different perspectives in order to be able to really design and implement a living shoreline that will stand up to the test of time and be ready for the bigger storms when they should occur. Healthy ecosystems always equal long-term gain and resiliency. Okay, we'll flip to the next one, please, Dawn. So this idea of providing food and habitat for the critters, this increases our resiliency. When we find that we are rehabilitating, say, a mowed shoreline or a lakefront that has been developed with a new home, and we're dealing with compacted soils and a really non-habitable kind of space for these animals and critters, we really need to think about what are all the components that they require in order to live there. When they do live there, they bring us so much value, right? It's valuable to just watch birds out your window. It's incredible to watch those butterflies return year after year, and to see the whole generation of the butterflies, the chrysalis, and the the little creature that the dragonflies come out of later. You know, all of these movements through our ecosystems and how plants and animals work together to adapt and to harbor each other and provide food and sustenance and materials for bedding and nesting. This is really what we're trying to get at with the ecological restoration work, is that it's not just about the aesthetic appeal of a traditional landscape plan, but it goes deeper into the ecosystems, those services that the nature is providing for us as well. And we sometimes devalue those as not being very important, but once we see them all working together, of course, it's, unquestionable at how valuable the ecosystems are. So when we can have the critters move back in, then we know we've kind of won the hardest part of the challenge. And here you can see pictures of, frogs and deer and soil biology and different flowers and things. So we know that the ecosystem below our feet is equally as diverse as the one above our feet, that we're living and breathing in every day. And we really want to make sure that we're using creativity and innovation, but also looking back at heritage skills and knowledge, and how can we actually bring those skills forward with new ideas and new innovations. This is a sort of a log teepee that has brush and hay and seaweed all around it, so that those critters that want to live on that crest of that oceanfront property have everything they require in order to do that. So hopefully when the animals move back in, then we gain another point as far as our resiliency quotient comes to play. So really important component there. Okay, next slide, please, Dawn. So the strategic use of biomass has always been, so important and so valuable to us here at Helping Nature Heal. we often look at the detritus that other people are moving away. Oh my goodness. Pardon me. Sorry about that. Had a sneeze. 'Tis the season, I suppose, late fall. So I often find it amazing when we're traveling around communities and we see people putting leaf litter out at the road, grass clippings, tying up branches and sticks and twigs and things so they can go off to the compost facility or to the dump. And to me, that is gold. So keeping these materials on site in situ where they can do work is so valuable and so important. We know that coarse woody debris takes a fair amount of time to decompose, and mycelium is driven by that decomposition process. So we want mycelium in our landscapes at all times, making the linkages from one root system to another and really sharing. It's really the information highway underneath our feet, right? It shares information, water, nutrients, and minerals, as well as any challenges. If one tree is getting nibbled by a bug, that mycelium network will pass that message along to other trees so that they can change their chemistry so that they are not attractive to those bugs, or send out different vibrations to draw in the predators of those bugs. It's really quite an interesting and amazing world when we really pay attention to all of that. And most of that comes because we allow for leaf litter, hay, logs, brush, and seaweeds and things to stay on the site so it can feed all of these systems that we don't even see. So things like branches and twigs and chunks of log, coarse woody debris of all sorts, root systems, tip-ups, seaweeds, of course, and tons of leaf litter really do help to feed the system, but keep it active so that the critters can use it for habitat, etc. Really important to keep that biomass moving along. So we call this the strategic use. We often do these activities in the spring after we have applied winter protection to our plants. Then in the spring, we use that material to scatter it around or use it in a very strategic way within the landscape plan so that we're keeping all of that material nearby. All that, when we add it to a system, especially if it's been mowed or compacted by machinery during the developmental processes, really helps to soften things up, feed the soil food web, and then as the ecosystem rebounds, the larger critters will move back in as well. And this all kind of adds to the puzzle of how we keep our coastlines healthy, one by doing this for sure. So that stubble and whatnot from our meadows and things will trap leaves and be great habitat for the plants to hibernate in. So we really want to encourage this as much as we can. Thank you for that. And we'll skip to the next slide, please, Dawn. So we want to think about all of that we've just said in the preface. The plants are important, the biomass, the debris is important, how we make use of that material is really key. And we do that with the mindset that this is going to help us to prepare better for storms coming. If we have healthy ecosystems, they're more resilient, just inherent in their own energy. They can sway and move with the wind. I often say, a branch might break off of a tree, but the tree is still alive, right? We don't get rid of the landscape because a branch broke. So we have to think about, how are we going to prepare for storms? What kind of material do we need in order to do that? And what are the changes that we can anticipate happening after a storm? We know that we're not stopping climate change at this stage, that we are not, we can't reverse it either. And so the best we can do is live in this new era of adaptation. And when we're here in adaptation, it means that we have to have a greater awareness about what's going on around us and what are the influences that are, pushing onto us. So we think about storm surge and high wind and flying debris and materials that might get sloughed off the edges of our banks, and whether that's a creek or a river or a lakefront, things are going to change, and they're always going to change from here on in. The era of having a static landscape is over, and that's just something we have to come to terms with. And so what can we do to best be ready for these storms, as well as know that something's going to be different when we open our eyes the next day? And so reducing the stress of all that comes from being prepared and having a plan of action afterwards. So we just want to make sure that people have this kind of new awareness that we are in adaptation mode, and that what does that mean for you? You know, it's going to mean different things for different people depending on where they live and what kind of influences are incoming onto the landscape through that storm. So I'm sure a lot of you, are thinking about storm preparedness and have your kit for 72 hours so that if you're, stuck inside without power, you know how to feed your family and take care of any first aid needs. The same sort of ideas need to be adapted for your outdoor landscape now. So things like pruning your trees ahead of time, using that material in some other way rather than getting rid of it. If there's a lot of animals and critters that travel through your landscape, making sure that we have habitat for them too, so they're not being harmed through these high winds and challenging events. So it's similar, but different, right? We just have to pull it to the outdoors now. So we'll just head to the next slide, please. When we saw Hurricane Fiona, if some of you are inland or on the other coast, you were not probably affected by Fiona. But here in the Maritimes, it was the largest hurricane that hit landfall in Nova Scotia's history. And so there was loss of life. There was loss of a lot of land. PEI saw probably the worst damage out of the Maritime provinces and the North Shore of Nova Scotia. Really devastating change happened. Some of our landscapes had been fine through the previous storms, through Dorian, through, all these Arthur and all the other storms of yesteryear. But Fiona was a real trigger, right? She came in with such a wrath, and even only for a short distance of time, really made quite a lot of change. And so we really need to now think more about how that change is affecting us and what we're going to do about it. Part of the answer is to be prepared prior to that, but also it's hard to prepare your shoreline, right? We can double stake things, we can tie things down, but if a storm such as Fiona comes along, there's not much you can do about it. So then the preparation is around having a good plan, having had monitored it prior to the storm so you know how much you lost, and getting ready for sort of the eco-anxiety that comes after this grade of storm, where what's your mental health going to be like the next day? With Fiona, it happened primarily overnight. So the next morning, people were sort of opening the shutters and saying, holy cow, what happened? And there was a lot of eco-anxiety. People had feeling like they had lost everything. Some people were more fortunate and only lost a few meters. Others lost all of the land in front of their home and the front of their house. And again, there was loss of life with this hurricane as well. So some people lost everything, their mom or their family member. We have to start thinking about how do we deal with it from a psychological perspective as well. And this term eco-anxiety was coined a few years ago, but I think now we really need to start taking that more seriously. So we can apply first aid to the landscape. We need to be able to apply first aid to us as well, and think about our long-term goals and shifts that we might need to do in order to continue living in that location. Some people will move their homes back. Some will sell and get out of the way. Some people, including clients of ours, had to literally just kind of wash their hands of it and walk away because everything was gone after the storm Fiona. So it's really tricky to feel, under ownership of this landscape, and then also feel like, how do we deal with all of that stress and pressure afterwards? And really what I find the solution lays in preparedness ahead of time and having an action plan after time. And we'll go through those steps of monitoring so that you'll be able to know the reality of what that means. I think what happens a lot is that people live through these storms and they see the change, but because they didn't measure or photograph before the storm as accurately as we would encourage them to, they really don't know how much they've lost. And so once you start talking to your neighbors, and then the newspaper shows up to interview you and ask lots of questions, the numbers can get quite inflated quite quickly because we're not quite sure. But someone says, oh, they lost 10 feet. Well, then I must have lost more than them. I lost 12. So it's something like that. When we're prepared, we can measure, we can photograph and video. And then when we go back after the storm and we see what actually has happened, maybe we only lost a foot. And so it can help reduce the stressors right away. And it can also help us to determine what our moves are going forward. So we'll talk about that next. Okay, we'll hit the next slide, please, Dawn. So part of this sense of knowing is normalizing this conversation around erosion. A lot of people think that erosion is something that happens to us and to our land, and that it's a freak accident or something. It's not really like that, right? We know that Mother Nature's in charge of what goes on in this planet, whether a volcano erupts or doesn't. We can't control that. We can't control when the next hurricane is going to come and how the velocity of those winds are going to impact our home, our trees, and our landscapes in general. So we can't control the inputs. And that also puts us into a bit of a tizzy, because when we're out of control as humans, we tend not to like that feeling. And so we can't make a prescription if we don't understand all those reasons. So when we look a little deeper into this conversation around erosion, especially, and we start talking about it in a more normal sense that we understand it happens every time water and soil touch each other, there's erosion happening. Of course, that could be happening every day, every second of every day. When a storm comes, it's usually magnified, right? So that the storm is hitting a particular area. All of that force is happening all at once in usually a very short time frame. So of course, it's going to be exacerbated. And if we don't talk about it, then the stressors just get elevated and we have more and more worry over time. So we really want to think about, how do we normalize this conversation? We do that by talking about it as much as possible, especially if we live connected to the water and the land, if it's not just a seasonal cottage that we might be at for a couple weeks a year. I mean, that too, but there's a difference there between the seasonality of folks who come only during the summer. We have clients like that as well that are, only here for 3 to 4 weeks a year. So of course they've picked the best time to come, right? In the middle of July or August, when it's hot and sunny and beautiful, not very many bugs, and usually no storms. But they don't see what happens just a month later or 6 weeks later when September and October comes, when we have those big storms. So by the time they come back next summer, things have kind of normalized again. And sure, there might be some changes, but they didn't live through it like other people had. So they have a different experience than the folks who are living here on a day-to-day. And those folks who are dealing with these issues on a daily basis have even more stressors put upon them, of course, because they're seeing it all the time. So we really want to think about, talking about it a lot, understanding it, doing a little research of our own, taking webinars like today, really getting out there and chatting with our neighbors and our community members, maybe those that are in power in our region around permits and policies, putting our hand up and saying, why are these houses being planted so close to the lake? That's a big step. If we can just get people to back up a little bit more, get out of harm's way, then some of these stressors wouldn't be so imperative. But they are, so we want to keep chatting about them. And I think one of the really good things is just monitoring, assessing your land, understanding it, learning how to read that book of nature, the language of nature, so that we understand where the challenges and opportunities are ahead of time, so we can be ready the day after a storm happens and put some work into practice right away and get things done. Okay, Dawn, we'll hit the next button, please. Challenge and opportunity was told to me as a small person that it's the same coin. And a smart person, an intelligent person, will see challenge as opportunity. That if you think of them being one side of, either side of a coin, that with challenge comes opportunity, right? A lot of people talk about being in balance and equilibrium and this kind of idea. When we're in balance, we're not being challenged. Everything is status quo and everything is kind of even Steven. When we're in equilibrium, it tips like this, still kind of even Steven, but as this one goes up, that one goes down. And normally those things are equal. So equilibrium is different than balance, but it's similar in a way. When we think about challenge and opportunity, challenge could be a complete devastation, and the opportunity might seem very small at the onset. But if we can use all of the faculties of our knowledge and skill and ingenuity, we can also have large opportunities that come out of challenge. Because of Hurricane Juan, X, Y, and Z happened, right? In a good way. Things changed because of Dorian, because of Fiona, and on as our history proclaims it. We can see that these challenges in one way are just sort of getting your goat to get out there and do it better, right? Try again, try harder, try something new. From the environmental perspective, we know that bank swallows really need erosion in order to have happy colonies. They need at least 3 feet above water to have the safety from their predators. So without erosion, we wouldn't have bank swallows. And what we're finding in some of our landscapes, especially here in the Maritimes, is that people have worked so hard to stop the erosion from in front of their home that they have eliminated the very habitat that these bank swallows require, right? They need eroding cliffs in order to have habitat. And so by protecting us, we have now harmed somebody else. And this idea of, we're all on this planet together, we're all kin, we're all related in one form or another, really kind of makes that point that everything we do has an effect on something else. So the whole challenge and opportunity conversation can really go in a multitude of directions. But as we speak of it today in this environmental kind of avenue, we want to be sure that we are protecting the habitats for our animals, and that the land-based plants and critters can continue to live in these spaces. Because if we don't forget, without them, we can't live here on this planet anymore, right? Without the trees creating oxygen, without the smaller plants storing carbon and creating habitat for those animals and critters, without that ecosystem, that big puzzle of life, solid with all the parts connected, it makes it very challenging for our mere human landscape to be enough for us to live on. So we really want to make sure that we're protecting as best as possible, as much as possible, at every opportunity that we have. So we want to think about what's challenging you in your landscape, your lakefront, your riverfront property. How can you find an opportunity that not only solves your challenge, but perhaps even better, adds benefit to somebody else's capacity? So for instance, we want to make sure that we're not cutting down all the trees to have a beautiful view and losing the habitat from the owls and, you know, the chickadees and whoever else might be living in those trees, right? Because when they leave, then owls, especially as a keystone animal, if we lose an owl out of our landscape, then we get inundated with mice and rats and voles and moles and all kinds of critters that aren't so good in our human space, right? They chew on our wiring and they clog up our septic fields and things like that. So we want to make sure that we're doing our best possible work through the lens of sustainability so that we can ask all the questions. Is the environmental pressure of this choice too great for the community that I live in? And the community means your home, your family, your neighbors, but also the animals and plants that live in that community with you. Is the social sphere of sustainability being addressed as well? Is there space for me to have social time outdoors? Can I do that in a more gentle way that I'm not ruining the landscape in the same time? Could I have a pathway system through the nature rather than a full-blown green golf course lawn in between my house and the lake? You know, so you want to think about those social, environmental, and then the third sphere of sustainability is the economic. So climate change is actually a big driver of economy, right? We have people deployed to trim trees. Once a storm has hit and gone, potentially arborists from all over the province might go to a specific area to help clear the power lines. Those people are being paid, right? So there's an economy generated by that. Everybody like ourselves who are in the ecological restoration world are getting more work because climate change is not slowing down. It's wreaking havoc on all sorts of landscapes. Landscapers are having more work. Contractors putting roofs on, fixing windows, you know, all of these things drive our economy. And so we want to make sure that we're not, you know, putting a plug in that system. We want to make sure that the system stays open and whole so that all of us get a benefit from a sustainable point of view through that lens to help out in the climate crisis as best as we can. So we can talk more about that too in the chat if you like later, but we'll hit the next slide. I see that we're just about an hour in, so I don't want to delay. So this is a beautiful quote from an NGO that we have been working with for the past 4 or 5 years in New Brunswick. And Serge is his name, La Rochelle. Serge called me in October and said, oh my God, we had a freak storm on the weekend and our project is ruined. It's devastated. He was so upset. He was in tears. He was trying to describe to me what had happened. And I asked him, did you take photographs? Oh, yes, he said, I have some photographs. Great. Send me the photos. So then, did you measure? Well, no, I'll go measure tomorrow. Okay, call me back after you measure. So we had already set him up for a monitoring protocol. So it was easy for him to go back. Of course, his first reaction was, oh my gosh, you know, something changed and it feels devastating to me. But after we had a conversation and we looked at the measurements and we looked at the photographs, it turned out that it wasn't as bad as what he had thought. Had we not had those measurements and photographs from the installation phase, then we wouldn't know how bad it really was, right? So Serge says in June, H&H, that's Helping Nature Heal, performed a living shoreline. in the community of Cocan. And we built a very large wattle fence. We built an upland meadow. We are protecting, in this instance, a septic field for a marina. And so the septic land was eroding quite quickly, and people were noticing the rock wall was gone that had been built there when the field went into place. Geotextile was spewed around the beach, you know, that stuff that gets into whale bellies. And it was really quite challenging for him to see past all of that damage. And so I asked him to send more photos and things. And then next slide, I guess, Dawn, is where we'll see what happened here. So we did our winter protection workshop where we had a group of volunteers in place. We added some brush and protective mechanisms around the upland plants. And then we moved onto the shoreline of this wattle fence, added some more materials, wattled a little more, did a bit more weaving, added some hay and brush and some live stakes of willow and whatnot. And then the following weekend, there was this windstorm that came in and washed a small chunk away. So let's just have a minute to think about this now. The willow wattle fence was over 300 feet long, and we measured the amount of change was in the 60 feet range. So it was a small portion of the overall length. And what happened was that the fence itself was still attached. The waves that came in simply took the soil away from the base of the wattle fence. So the fence started floating, and when the tide finally released, the fence was just laying up against the shoreline. So most of the materials were still intact. The materials that had washed away were just actually around the corner on the beach of the same project. So we just picked them up and put them back. We added a few stronger stakes and a few extra rocks along the toe of the slope, you know, manipulated the beach stones a little bit. And within a couple hours, we had it all mended up and back in place. So I guess the big lesson was that the initial reaction was devastation, right? He was crying, he was upset. The volunteers were saddened that all their work had just gone to pot, basically. But then the reality check came in when we cross-referenced the measurements. We took additional measurements, put additional pins in where we noticed, okay, that corner is going to be tricky then. We're going to add 2 more transects so we can measure again more detailed measurements there. We also noticed that the site beside this project that hadn't had any infrastructure put on it was quite devastated. It lost maybe 6 to 8 feet of shoreline was ripped off. Our shoreline with the wattle fence had no loss of dry land. It was simply the buffer zone that had changed. And this buffer zone that we built wasn't really changed that much. It was just slightly moved, displaced perhaps, with a small amount of material that had kind of washed around the corner. So I really wanted to talk about this buffer zone idea. The idea that the point I'm trying to make with these last couple of slides here is that had we not built the buffer zone, which in this case was a wattle fence, some hay and some brush protection covering open soil, and then a ton of plants, probably 1,000 or more plants that had gone into this landscape. Had we not done that, the land itself would have been challenged, right? Just like we saw in the neighbor next door, they lost 6 to 8 feet of shoreline, dry land got washed away. Our project with a buffer system instituted on it did not lose any of the dry land. The buffer zone, which is also the riparian zone, right, or the coastal zone, that's the buffer between all water and all land, right? When we talk about the riparian space, it's wet and dry, and it has critters from both segments and plants from both segments. That's a buffer zone. That's what makes it so abundant and diverse and exciting to work in, because it has all that diversity. but it also has all this resiliency because of that. It's inherent in the fact that roots bind to soil and bind to each other. So more plants means more binding, right? More open soil that is fed and nourished properly, more capacity for the roots to bind to it. When we have a healthy above ground portion, those canopies that we showed you in one of those screens, when we have an abundant canopy, we have bounce off. So that's part of the benefit of that buffer zone. If we don't have buffer zones, then we lose our investment, right? The land itself is the thing that's going to get washed away. We think about buffer zones like the bumper on our vehicles, right? Especially the one on the front. That is there to protect our engine. If we didn't have a bumper and we bumped into another vehicle or a building or a telephone pole or something, our engine would be the thing that got hit. So we put a bumper there in order to buffer us, to bump us back, to allow us some space, some little gratuity there of time and energy, that we are not hurting our engine. So when we think of the landscape in the same kind of scenario, these riparian zones, whether they're lakes, rivers, or ocean, is the bumper, right? That's our buffer so that our land, our homes, our infrastructure, the power grid, the roads doesn't get damaged. The buffer takes the hit. So when we explain that to our clientele and to our students and to the world that we work in, all of a sudden the light bulbs start coming on, right? It's like we need the buffer zones to stay strong and healthy so that they can protect the human side of that equation, right? Usually the land that we purchased, the home that we built, the septic field, the well, the basement, the power grid, the road, all of those things require us to buffer them from the environmental pressures that are pushing up against the landscape. So we really want to make sure that that point hits home, because these buffer zones are the thing that protects us more fully than anything else can. All right. We'll go back to the next slide, please. And here Serge is saying, he learned from us that this is the new way to think about landscape and how things change over time. And his final quote there, the living shoreline approach is well worth the work, the initiative, and the continued investment, right? It's worth spending time and energy here in the riparian buffer zone so that later you're not having to pick up the pieces of the greater investments, like the land itself, the home, and whatever else you've put on top of it, right? Really, really important that we start to think this way and that we speak this way when we talk about erosion and climate change. If it's true that there's nothing left for us to do to stop climate change, that we're just in an era of adaptation, then we had better be able to adapt quickly and smartly so that we're making the right moves, the right investments, and the right putting the right work into play so that everybody has the capacity to learn and experience and then forge forward with new strategies and innovations in order to make this thing stick. Because we're at a tipping point, right? We've gone past so many of these tipping points when they used to say 20 years from now, 30 years, 50 years, like we're in it on a daily basis. So we really need to start thinking about how are these humans that we're related to going to stay on this planet for as long as we want. It's going to be tricky, but I think we can get there. I have hope that we can get there. Okay, Don, we'll hit the next slide. Thank you. Winter protection is part of keeping your investment healthy. So here you can see there's brush on the landscape. There's hay bales up the top that are staked in. In this experience, in this event, we have a very steep slope. and the lip is curling off and breaking down and coming off. The wind gets in underneath there and just erodes the sediment away faster than it can rebuild and keep itself together. So putting the hay in place in that strategic place, really vital to making sure the wind doesn't continue to wash that away. And then the brush, of course, provides winter habitat for all the critters that are going to live in that location. But its greatest asset is that it provides shade cover for the open soil and the plants that we've just put in there. So in the winter time, when the foliage from the bulk of the plants has fallen off, and the litter has blown away, these stems are standing all by themselves, getting kind of bounced around in the wind. So adding a brush layer helps to kind of keep them static a little bit so that they're not bouncing as much. But also, I think even the bigger component of the brush is that it shades the soil from getting heated up by our winter sun. As you know, here in the Maritimes, the sun is quite low in the winter sky. And so from morning until supper time, this low sun is just creeping across the horizon, and it's really casting a deep ray onto the soil itself. And so it's heating up that soil. And we know that at night, of course, when the sun is gone, it freezes again, and then we get it heating up the next day. So we get a rapid freeze-thaw cycling. This also happens along riverbanks and lakes, especially southeast facing, southeast, southwest facing. We know that as the sun comes along, it warms up that landscape, water starts to melt, roots get more active, the soil starts to move, and then when it freezes again, gets solid one more time. So this freeze-thaw cycling creates a problem with the feeding roots of the plants. The feeding roots are usually closer to the surface. They're usually finer quality in texture. They're really quite thin. And this freeze-thaw breaks them down. So in the spring, you have what's known as frost heave, where the plant is actually heaved out of the ground, usually by an inch or two. And so that plant is now going to die, right? The root systems have been severed. It's been pushed up out of the ground in the early days of late winter, early spring. And now the elements are oxidizing those root systems, and that plant is probably going to die unless it gets dug up and replanted properly. So this shade blanket with this brush really is helpful to prevent that from happening. A lot of people think that winter protection is keeping the plants warm and insulated all winter long, and it's sort of the opposite of that. We really want the plants to freeze and stay frozen for the entirety of the winter and only come out of dormancy in early April, when we can start removing and taking away some of these winter protective mechanisms and allowing the land to slowly and gently thaw rather than going through these rapid cycles. So when we can control that by having a project that has enough funding and finances wrapped around it, that we can come in and do that work in a real strategic way, it's a huge benefit to the landscape for sure, and builds resiliency, because now those roots get to live a second year or a third year, depending on when they were planted. And as those plants get bigger, of course, their root systems will spread with more tenacity and really reach out and make those connections that they require from the other plants. So winter protection is a must in our books for sure. Okay, next slide, Dawn, please. So strategic composting is what we do with all that material come spring. So what we do is turn it back into the landscape. So leaf litter is often tucked under mulches. Hay bales are turned into hay flakes and spread around as a mulch layer. Brush can be woven into wattle fences, back into living shorelines, created into brush walls. In one way or another, we never want to take anything off the landscape. We want to keep adding materials as opposed to eliminating them. And by doing that, we increase that resiliency factor even more. Okay, next slide. So monitoring is a really big part of this entire process. So if you've just purchased it, you're in the middle of planting it, or you're well within a project spectrum, you really want to make taking monitoring right away, as soon as you can. And it's like planting a tree. The best time was 20 years ago, right? The best monitoring plans happened the day you bought the place, or the day that you inherited, or whatever your situation is. So you really need to get that monitoring happening quickly. You need benchmarking. You can sometimes get that from the survey, if not too much time has passed from the date that it was officially surveyed by a licensed surveyor till the day that you take handle of this project. There could have been change for sure, but sometimes there isn't. So survey is a good base map. And from there on, you want to start dating and documenting all of your interactions with the landscape. So you want to know what you've done, the plant community you've added, the critters that you see coming along after you planted it, how many times you fed it, when you were working on it. You want to keep really good journal of all of the work that's happened on the landscape, and you want to keep that handy so you can keep track of it. The monitoring field guide is a booklet that helps you to track all of that. And if we are providing that service to you, then we have a very specific protocol for all the different types of monitoring that we can do, whether it's lake, river, or ocean. And so, depending on the topography and whatnot of each landscape, there could be different components that you want to think about. But for sure, you need to measure at least 3 transects per 100 feet, sometimes more if you have changes within the topography, or different soil types from one sector to another, and more transects the better. There is a point though where a drone becomes much more helpful if it's a large landscape, or if you need more transects than is what it's reasonable to do in a handheld situation. So a drone is really valuable. You also need to remember how to measure and how to use a ruler, how to sketch things on paper and take measurements. Charts that you can use to collect data is really valuable. And and so this is just us getting started. And here we are in this picture on the right, just in Kokan, measuring forward from the crest of the ocean back into 2-meter increments. You can use 5. It depends on how big your site is. But that will all be explained in the next couple slides. Okay, Dawn, thank you. When we do the monitoring, we have a drone, so we can also overlay drone information over top of each other and really get, that robust monitoring. I think Dawn was saying there was something like 400 transects from one site, like where the drone is flying over top and really taking a lot of photographs and stitching that all together. When you have the aerial view, you can overlay that mapping and see either the transgression of the crest itself. And if you don't have the capacity for drone, then transects will help, but it doesn't give all the story. So I would really encourage you to think about, as an organization, or maybe a homeowners association, or just a collective few neighbors, having someone come in and flying your properties on a regular basis. We have clients who do it once a year only, others who will do it at the beginning of the year and then right after storm season. So in our area, that's sort of July, August, September, October. And so she'll have her landscape flown, a couple times a year and overlaid to be able to gauge what's changing and how it's changing. It's not all bad news either. A lot of land is accruing. We know that all this sand that is being swept away out into the ocean has to go somewhere. And some landscapes are actually growing in size because they're a depository for sediment from, sand that has been lost on bluffs elsewhere in the region. So knowing that, looking at how the ocean currents or the lake and river currents are moving will help you to understand which place you are within the accretion or loss of materials, right? If you are on a straight river, for instance, if your soil is getting swept away, it's not going to stay where you are, especially if there's a current to it. It's going down somewhere else and it's landing on somebody else's land. So it's really good to have that kind of knowledge of what kind of body of water are you on and where is the currents, wind and water, moving all of this material around to. That'll give you lots of great insight. Okay, so we'll hit the next slide. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So we specialize in living shorelines, of course, and so we've been doing this work for 20 plus years now, and we offer this as a with a site fee, and we can do different reports and summaries and things based on where you're located and what kind of situations you're in. I'm sure there will be people, in your area. I know this webinar is going across Canada, so check out who in your neighborhood can help you out with these kinds of ideas. Drones, of course, are becoming much more readily used in the public, so you will be able to find people who can fly your space. If you're in the Maritimes, you're welcome to connect with us, and we will certainly help you understand how to take care of all of that. Okay, we'll hit the next slide, please. Thank you. Oh, this is a list of our references. We'll just go to the next slide. I think it's the Q&A. Yeah, so we have some time for Q&A. I wanted to just touch on one thing that I hadn't, and I'm just realizing that in the monitoring portion of your work, it's not just about transects. And transects are perpendicular lines that go usually from water towards the inland, and they start at the crest and they come backward inland, either 2 or 5 meters, depending on your location. And if there's something different or interesting about a space within your landscape, you want to maybe put 3 transects on that on its own, and then have transects on the other one. So transects are these lines that you measure over and over again. That's just one way to monitor distance, right? So you're measuring the distance that the edge of the land is compared to an inland space. So you can measure that as, say, 10 meters, and then next year you measure it and it's only 7. Well, you lost 3 meters, right? That would be quite a devastating loss. And so that is just distance. Another way to monitor, though, is that journaling idea of when you planted, what you planted, how many times you fed, and whatnot. So keeping a really good journal, you can write it on your calendar, and then save your calendar with your year-end taxes or something. So you can always know where it is, and you can always look back next year and decide, is this storm similar to the last storm? Should I expect something that is similar in reaction or not? The other way is through photographs and video, and that we touched on with the drone. But if you don't have the capacity for a drone and you don't have one, or you don't have the capabilities of hiring someone to do that for you, then you want to be able to take your own photographs. So it's important to photograph the transects, these straight lines that are perpendicular to the water's edge. But also from the water, you want to be able to look back at the land and notice how the slope face is reacting to change. And photographs are a really good way to do that. If you have your transects at the crest, and if you spray paint them orange along the top, we usually use like 2x2s or 1x2s and stake those into the ground. We spray them bright orange so that we can go out in the kayak or on low tide. We can walk out a certain distance from the shore and look back at the land from the water. And this way, if they're painted bright orange, you can see them quite easily in your photographs. And if they're equally spaced, then you can also overlay those photographs with a simple computer, or even just by looking at one photograph versus the other, it's easier to tell how the slope face is reacting to the onslaught of wave and wind energy through photographs. And you can see that usually there's, some defining characters. There's a boulder, or there's, a tree leaning over the edge, or, something like that, that you can kind of take in your primary photo, and then subsequent photos taken from the same spot, from the same angle, at around the same time of year. Or if you're doing them, in the quarters, taking them at the same location, time, and place each quarter year. That's really helpful, because then you can see, oh, it looks like this in spring, after the spring thaw and after winter's wrath has hit us. We can see those pins, we can see the boulder, you can see those items that are characteristic on your landscape. And then the summer photos, you can see, oh yeah, things are growing, there's more vegetation. Then in the fall, you can see leaf litter. You can take notice of which plants are thriving, which are dropping needles early or late. And then you're ready for storm season. And, on the East Coast here, storm season is sort of July, August, September, October, sometimes a little bit later. And so winter storms, of course, from January to March are quite prevalent here as well. So if we're taking measurements and photos, at least on quarterly, then we can kind of see the progression over time. Even if there's not much difference, it's really good to know that. It puts us to rest a bit, right? So that we're not so worried and so tied up about what we've lost, but more so about what do we still have, right? We want to flip that energy to, oh, we lost 10%. That means we had a 90% win, right? We want to keep trying to focus on the positive side of things and what we still have, because it's what's still there that's important. What's lost is gone. We're not going to be able to get it back, right? So what's there? What worked? Did the wattle fence work? Did the willow work? Did some other plant that we didn't expect work better? And then do more of that, right? So as we kind of pick up our socks after the stress of the challenge, the storm, or whatever's happened, it's really important to think positively so that we can get back to work and get on doing it. The worst thing possible is to leave open soil, right? So if we're so stressed and we're so anxious about what we've lost, and we're feeling hopeless, that's a really sad place to be. I'm always trying to encourage people to see, just like what we said with Serge from Kokan. Well, you might have lost 20%. That means 80% worked. And 80% is an amazing grade, right? If we had more, that would be great too. But this is the new reality, right? So we've got 80%. What worked there? What worked extremely well? What's marginally working? And how can we take what that answers are and resurface them and put them back into play? Do more of what works. Stay positive. Look at it as a learning opportunity, a time for more connectedness to the landscape. It's like when we heal something up, we bond with it in a deeper way. You can imagine your child, when they skin their knee and they come running for you, the bond of that motherly love or that fatherly attention and love, to band-aid up that knee and take care of your child and snuggle them and love them and give them a little extra kisses and hugs and whatnot. That makes the bond better. The next time that child gets hurt, he's going to know exactly who he needs to go to get that kind of attention. The landscape, especially our shorelines, is just like that, I find. We work and toil and struggle, and we make these efforts to do the living shorelines, the plant-based strategies, and then something happens and we get sad. We get sad for a minute, and we kind of sulk around in that. And then we go back and we remeasure and we notice the good stuff again, and we notice, oh, that did work. Oh, those willows did hold on. Oh, this dogwood did better than that alder. Okay, great. Let's do more of that. And so that also comes into account with this idea of eco-anxiety and first aid. It's another project that we can talk about later, and maybe you'll have me back, Monica, to think about that. But the eco-anxiety and first aid is a program that we provide for nonprofit organizations, for our community groups, for our private landholders as well, about how do you rebound? You know, how do you get back up on your feet and do it again, and do it again, and do it again, and do it again, right? I mean, the alternative is to not live there. That's the cold, hard truth of the whole thing, is that the only true solution, with a capital S in quotes, is to get the heck out of the way, right? Because we already discussed that we can't control Mother Nature and the inputs of energy that are hitting our land from the water's edge. So if we can't control it, and if we can't handle rebounding or adapting, then it's better for us not to be there. So if we feel like that in our heart, that it's too much, then it's better off for us to get the heck out of the way, because it needs nurturing and care over and over again. It needs our resilience and tenacity to come back and make sure that soil isn't bleeding anymore, right? Put the Band-Aid on it right away, so that in the spring we can come back and put some more plants in there and get them to do the work for us. It's really that kind of personable relationship with the landscape that we're really forging. And I really hope that I've given you what you were looking for at this webinar. And I guess, Dawn, we'll just pull up the last slide and see if anyone has any more questions or anything. What we're offering for you all today, aside from the recording of this event, is our monitoring guide. It'll be the digital version that Dawn will send off to you. The key, though, is that you have to send us a question, a comment, or a query. So connect with us, have some engagement with us, tell us what you thought, and then as a thank you for that engagement, we'll send you this monitoring guide. The other thing is that we have an amazing social worth, I guess, is how you say it. Instagram, website, Facebook, all of that stuff is a going concern with our employees here. So please check in with us on those different media. We have an Instagram campaign happening right now with lots of really cool, environmentally friendly, local to Nova Scotia gifts and things. And it's sort of a typical Instagram offer, so you can join that or not if you like. But we also are offering our Ecological Landscape Design course this winter again. It starts in January. And so the information is there on our website, on our Facebook and our Instagram as well. So I hope that there's a few questions that I can help out with that I didn't describe during the talk. And please stay in touch with us. We're happy to travel and to consult and do Zooms and all that kind of stuff. So our goal, our mission for Helping Nature Heal, you'll notice that the first part of our name is helping. We are here to help each other, to educate, understand, create some awareness and understanding, and to offer up our skills and knowledge to people. Some of that is by fee, of course, and some of it is part of our goodwill. And so please reach out and let us know how we can help your nature heal. And thank you so much for this time and opportunity. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer anything that's come up.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rosmarie, for that presentation, and so much great information in there. And you're also a very good explainer. And so I just really appreciative of having you back in our freshwater stewardship community this year. We do have a couple questions that have already been pre-submitted, and then if people have thought of any questions as they've listened to Rosmarie, you can put those in the chat and we'll try to get through as many of them as we can. Before we start the Q&A, Nicole is just going to be dropping in a short survey link. And so if you can take a moment to fill that out and let us know, we also appreciate questions and feedback for our webinar. So if you can just take a minute to go through that, that would be very helpful, especially as we start to plan our webinar series for 2024. So if you have any speakers or topics that are really interesting to you or you don't know a lot about and you would like to, please let us know through that survey and we will do our best to fit that into the 2024 webinar series. So our first question, Rosemarie, is a simple one, but they're wondering what's the oldest site that you have and that you've been able to go back, and what has been maybe some things that you've learned from that site, or how you've changed how you've done things over those 20 years of work?
That's a really great question. Thank you so much. Because we're in a bit of a niche here on the East Coast, we don't have much competition in the ecosystem restoration world. And so most of our clients we've had for the full 22 years that we've been working here. And so I would say 22 years is our oldest one. And it's a beachfront in front of Kings Bay in Lunenburg County here. And what was happening was that the dune had there was a situation in around the early 1999, we had a big winter storm that blew this dune apart and defoliated, and most of the plants were washed away during that big aggressive storm. And so this homeowner contacted us about replenishing the dune and replanting the seagrass. And while we were doing that, we noticed that their house is planted on the dune. We all know that was a big mistake, but in the old days, they did that. And so this house has an 8-foot basement. And at the corners of this house, the lawn was always washing away. There was like a jiggling of the soil, and being a dune, of course, it just kept settling and settling. And so their grass wouldn't keep growing there. And I'm not a grass girl. We don't do grass in our company, but I noticed this erosion right at the corners of the house. And so we did a research study for them, and it turned out that the wave energy that was rolling up the dune was going through the dune and hitting this foundation and shaking the house. And after we asked the homeowner if we could wander around inside, every window had a crack in it, and almost all the drywall had one crack or another, usually above windows, above door frames, and things like that. And so they commenting about how their lawn care company could never get the grass to grow in this certain spots. So after we planted the dune, we also planted the backside of the dune with roses and shrubberies that were indicative of that location. So it was mostly Rosa virginiana, bayberry, alder, some spireas, of course, the Spartina, Marum grass mix, Amophilia, etc. Once we put that shrub layer in there and we created this sort of hedge in front of the home, they got their house fixed, and no more vibrations, no more loss of land around the basement area of their home. When we did further studies, we realized that the plants themselves were taking up that motion and sending the vibrations down deep into the earth, rather than them floating through the surface of the sand soil horizon and hitting the house and disturbing all of the land around it. So the plants did this very good work of not only knitting the dune together, but also moving the way the energy traveled through that system and forced it back down into the land as opposed to through the horizontal layers. It was really quite spectacular, and it was really beneficial to the homeowner, obviously. And to this day, we're still working with those folks and doing small projects and things for them, and no more busted drywall and broken windows. It was quite lovely. Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you. Our next question is about changing over a property. So people don't always know what the previous homeowners were doing when they purchase a property, or maybe they want to send off good information to the new property owner. So do you have any advice about either what people can give to the new property owner or how they might go about finding old information?
Yeah, also a really good question. And we run into this a lot with new homeowners, especially during the COVID era when people were buying sight unseen, through Zoom and through video and photographs only, and never actually having been here, and then arriving some, other moment with this big mystery in front of them of seeing a landscape that they didn't really recognize, plants they didn't really know, didn't really understand what the ecosystem services were within the landscape. So we found that a lot during COVID. What we suggest is keeping a good journal of what you're doing on the landscape. Any monitoring that you might do, having copies of the journal, the calendar, the monitoring. And if anything in particular is really valuable, like maybe a rain garden to prevent overland flow, I would have like the schematics and the plant species and the reasons why and the changes that I noticed after I installed that piece of infrastructure, so that the new homeowner doesn't just think that's like a kiddie pool or something and, plows it down and puts a lawn there again, because they would just be reversing all the good work that you've done. So things like that, I would transfer to the next owner, or I would hope that I would have that from the previous owner if I was buying a new place. Challenging to prescribe that as now, but if you're thinking that you might sell one day, you might want to start collecting that information and putting it in a separate file folder so that you can offer it up to the new owner. I know that when I've been in relations with realtors who ask me to kind of be present through these processes, it's always really wonderful to get some information from the old homeowners before they leave, so that you can pass that information along and see the strategies that they were working with. Whether they did the work themselves or hired out a contractor, it's always really important to kind of get as much information as you can. So I guess I would encourage everyone to do that same kind of thing. Lots of photographs, any measurements or monitoring that you have, any journals or even calendars with scribbled notes down is really valuable. And especially any pieces of infrastructure like swales or drains, rain gardens, anything that's going to really impact how people can, fully enjoy and not have those big challenges on the landscape after you leave. I think that's really valuable, and be so kind to the next person, right? If you did that, yeah, that'd be lovely.
And building off of that question, I don't know where this person is asking from, so I'll just make the assumption for maritime specific. But if the previous landowner didn't document this information, do you know of any places like government database, or is there a community science program that someone could go and try and get some of this information?
I don't really know any specifics. I think it depends on where you are. If people had to apply for permits to do any work on the landscape, then probably the permit office would have drawings or schematics at the very least, especially if it had any engineering attached to it, like drainage swales. Sometimes people would hire an engineer to make sure that dimensions of that piece of infrastructure was appropriate for the amount of water that they need to shed. So there would be permits for that. I would say, jeepers, if there's a local community garden organization, they might have some information about the landscape, especially if it's, a longtime owner and then you're the new person in the group, the new homeowner. Garden clubs, sometimes I'll ask them. Land registry We'll give you things like aerial photographs, deeds, surveys usually, that kind of like more legal information you can have access to. I think there might be a bit of a fee for some of those things, but yeah, I guess that is probably all that I can pull off the top of my head right now. Certainly, if you have like a local historical society, you could touch base with them and see if anything significant had happened on the landscape. You know, here in Halifax, we were just doing a project a week or so ago for the Shambhala School in Halifax. And they are a building that withstood the pressure of the Halifax explosion. That was, 100 or more years ago. And the land under and around that school has been tested for lead. And so the children were not allowed to participate in this outdoor project that we were doing for the school. We were building a rain garden for them. And normally we would have invited volunteers and parents and the teachers and even the student classes to come out and participate. But in this case, we weren't allowed to do that because of the factor of lead in the soil. So something like that, if you were a historic buff, you might snoop around and see what kind of history that community has, because it could be something significant like the Halifax explosion. Mm-hmm.
Good suggestion. Thank you. The next one is a question we also get a lot. So the situations you're talking about where you're doing the pre-monitoring and then you're able to assess after the storm, it requires people to have bought into this principle ahead of time. So it's before the storm has come. So can you give any strategies about getting people on board before the damage is done, before the big storm comes?
Yeah, I think, sometimes we can't go backwards, unfortunately. So, I mean, if there's people today that are sitting in on this webinar, I would say get out there to your next convenience and at least do a sketch of what things, how things are. If you can measure, that's great. Even if you can just pace it off, and know that your foot is 1 foot and you can just pace that off, or, take some photographs. Starting as soon as you can is always the best, because there could be a big storm tomorrow, right? We just don't know when the next big one is going to happen. Usually we get forecasted information. Maybe it's a week in advance or 3 or 4 days in advance of a big storm. And usually our stressors are up and we're worried about water and being able to flush the toilet and running out of batteries, and we're not running outside to measure things, right? So I would say in the lee of that, when we're all kind of calm and thinking about it, maybe just take a breath and take some time to head outside and have a look around. It's fall, the leaves are off the trees now. We'll soon get our first snow. Now's a perfect time to get out there and get some base measurements and photographs in place, and then think about setting yourself up for success, putting that on the calendar. Maybe it's once a season, once a quarter, twice a year. It only matters to you when you're at a net loss, right? And you need to make an insurance claim, or you need to finance the improvements and the repairs. That's when it's really important to know what's going on. So this will buy you time, it'll save you money later, and it'll save you a ton of heartache if you can get in there now. We can't go back, so today's the best day, right? So the next good opportunity that you have, I would say, make a date with yourself and your neighbor or the people who are, nearby that can help you measure or take pictures or put stakes in the ground. Depends on your scenario. If you're waterfront property, you probably should be doing that quite quickly before freeze up comes. We know that winter storms and ice scour and ice melt even can cause quite a bit of damage, especially on our interior lakes. So now's your opportunity, right? And yeah, use the skills that we talked about today. If you need more information, send us an email. We'll send you that monitoring guide so you can get Kickstarter on that. And then we're here to support you with any questions moving forward.
Great. Someone who's tuning in from not the Maritimes is curious how much of your materials or consultations can be kind of extrapolated elsewhere. So you had mentioned you do like Zoom calls, but they're just wondering, is it mostly for the Maritimes, which would make sense because that's where you're based, or is some of it able to be used elsewhere?
Yeah, the skills and knowledge that we have are completely transferable to any area where water and land touch. So if it's a lakefront or a river, it doesn't matter if that's in British Columbia, Alberta, or Nova Scotia. Water and soil work very similar when they touch each other. There is a solid and a liquid coming into play, and that liquid is going to start to wash away that solid. And if you're in sand, it's even more profound. If you're in heavy clay, it seems slower, but once it gets moving, it moves really fast, and you get mudslides and really aggressive erosion. So yeah, all of our work can be transferred somewhere else. And I would say there's maybe a few tweaks here or there on the actual technologies that we might use. We saw wattle fence, we saw upland riparian planting, but there's a whole bunch of other stuff that we do depending on slope grade, soil texture, the relative velocity of the incoming pressures of wind, water, and waves. So we kind of grade the landscapes as being high, medium, or low energy. And based on that energy, energy is also developed out of fetch and bathymetry. So if you're on a lake, how far is the other side? How much roll up do we have? How much space do we have for those waves to get really big before they crash onto the surface of soil over here? So there's a bunch of scientific stuff that goes on in the background, but we can help you figure that out for yourselves as well. I think it's good to note that we've done consulting in Ontario and Quebec as well. We have colleagues in BC, and we do have people in Calgary, but not so much in Saskatchewan and Manitoba. So it would be really great if someone out there had a water-based issue that we could help them out with, so that we could see what's different out there. But for the most part, the work that we've been doing has been used in lakefronts as well as rivers. And then, of course, all in different types of oceanfront locations as well. So I would be very confident consulting for someone, somewhere else in the country or the US for sure.
Perfect. And we have someone who's said the same thing, that they worked with you in the Maritimes. Now they're in Ontario, and many of the skills that they learned from you were transferable. So that's great. Our next question is, how do you accurately evaluate or monitor a sandy beach which changes shape daily?
So typically we use zinc rods, to 4-foot tall zinc rods that are pounded into the sand to about 12-inch mark, the 1-foot mark. And then those are monitored vertically. So you're actually measuring from the top of the zinc rod down towards the soil surface. So that's your new distance. And then, of course, the sand moves up and down throughout the season. So we are asking the beach monitors to do that like bi-monthly throughout the year. So there's also the transects going front to back, which also prove how the sand is accruing or receding. And then also we have the 1 meter square grid that drops down over top of the surface, and we can then determine how many plants are growing in that space per square meter, and then monitor that year over year from the same location. Of course, drones are really helpful here, where you might not have any major landmarks. we can still take photographs and measure and all of that from the ground. But you're right, these can change almost daily, or they do change daily for sure. So having an overland view from the drone is really strategic on those dunes, especially if you can get LiDAR and topography from that drone as well. Then you can really see how the land is shifting, how the dune is shifting over time as well. Yeah.
Great. And then the last question we have is just for a bit more information about the resources that you have available. So you mentioned the one guide that's available to people who are submitting an email to you. And you mentioned near the beginning the fertilizer, I think it was, that you make. So could you just maybe explain some different things that are available to people? Like, do you offer drone expertise if that's not something that someone has available to them? So just maybe a little bit of what you can offer would be great.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to do that as well. We do have a professional drone service, and Dawn is our pilot, and she has been licensed through the government. So she's, quite capable of providing you with the drone service. Dawn's email is listed as on the last slide there. So it's dawn@helpingnatureheal.com if you want more information about drone. We do also a full report, which is a robust scientific report where she and her teammates will build you a fully functioning report that you can share with engineers, your community, your municipal leaders. If you're applying for permits, this report comes in really handy. It describes all of the scientific information that we can gather about your site specific. So it's quite a strategic document that will help you move forward in making good decisions. We have another tactical item called a summary, and the reports and the summaries can be done for upland projects as well as shorefront projects, whether it's a lake, river, or the ocean. The summary is a smaller document, and it is sort of scaled to meet people's budgets. And it has sort of just the summarizing of that similar information as the report, just a smaller version of that. It's enough to kind of get you started. If you're applying for a permit, you can use that as a permit tool as well. We also are a design build company, and we travel throughout the Maritimes and Eastern Canada. So we have a fully operating construction crew who will take a design from either myself, our research team, or an engineering firm and enact that design onto your landscape. We also provide design services, consultations. If you already have a landscaping company that wants to do the work, but you need to feed them new information, then I'm also available to teach and educate and facilitate somebody's own landscaper or gardener on how to do some of these tasks. Our construction crew has like fall arrest and remote and wilderness first aid and that kind of thing. So we're fully insured and licensed to work on steep slopes, as well as in the upland of those spaces that are a bit high risk. So there's that. We make the abundance fertilizer here in-house, and so it's available at $20 a liter, and we do ship it through UPS so that you get next day shipping. And it is long-term viable. It does not have an end date, which is great. Mycelium, of course, is feeding on the seaweed, so it is a living biology that is meant to be used quickly, and we sell it as a high concentrate. So it's a 40-to-1 mixture, and we sell it in 1 liters, 2 liters, and 4 liters, or by bulk to farmers and field care workers. We have our own plant nursery, our own native species nursery. So we have a couple hundred acres in a local neighborhood here where we are growing. Currently, we have about 20,000 plants in pots of native origin. So they are our trees, shrubs, perennials, ground covers, mosses, and spring ephemerals. In some cases, we have some of those lovely spring orchids and things from the woodland. So we grow our own plants with the abundance, and then they're at retail or for our projects. Let's see. I guess the big thing is for people who are outside of our normal reach is the consultations with your workers, or if you have an engineer that is, you know, trying to develop a prospectus for you, and you want to add the plant-based strategies to a rock wall. For a traditional method is to just build a rock wall, but the hybrid so I think we host workshops, webinars like this. We have our Ecological Landscape Design course that happens every winter. We've been teaching it for 21 years. And so that happens the first Wednesday in January. It's a 6-week program. We usually run it back to back twice. So January, February, and then again, February, March, or March, April. Depending on, you know, how that goes. And then we do a ton of workshops on Wednesdays, either in the evening here at Helping Nature Heal or on Zoom. So people can just check out our website and see all of that stuff. And we also support our local food security organizations here. So we do a CD Saturday, which is a food security event every year, encouraging people to grow their own food. And through that, we support our local community gardens and outreach programs at schools and food forests and things like that. So it's all things sustainable, mostly in the ecological restoration realm of connecting us to the ecosystem so that we can help support our livelihoods here on planet Earth and stay here for another couple thousand years and keep humanity alive working on this land. So I guess for further information, I would say contact us by email, check out our website or any of our social media, and you'll get a good gist of it, and then send us an email whenever you have further questions.
Great. Well, that was all the questions. So we got in right on time. So thank you again so much, Rosmarie, for sharing all of your years of experience and knowledge. And just, again, really thankful to have you back this year. Maybe we will have you back next year too. We will definitely keep everyone posted on based on that survey and what people are looking to hear from. So enjoy your evenings. Every time zone is at an evening now. So thank you everyone so much for coming. And we'll be sending the recording and the handout and some links to some of the things Rosmarie's mentioned early next week.
Excellent. Thanks everyone for joining, and thanks for all your questions. And I look forward to chatting with you in the future.